The travelers found them seated around the table. 19 men and women, forks still gripped in their hands, mouths open mid-chew. Dead for 3 days. The ham at the center of the table hadn't been touched. Neither had the cornbread, the greens, or the sweet potato pie. But their stomachs had ruptured from the inside out. 7 miles south of Selma, Alabama, where the old Montgomery Road curved past a stand of water oak trees, there stood a 2-story roadhouse that locals called Wardlow's. Built in 1871 by a Confederate veteran named Thomas Wardlow, the establishment served travelers making the journey between Selma and the smaller settlements scattered across Dallas County. It was nothing fancy, just a wide front porch, 6 rooms upstairs for lodging, and a dining hall where Wardlow's wife, Margaret, served meals at noon and sunset. The roadhouse sat on what had been plantation land before the war. The main house had burned in 1865 when Union cavalry swept through the area. All that remained were the foundation stones and a family cemetery enclosed by an iron fence. Wardlow bought the property cheap in 1870. He cleared the ruins, salvaged what bricks he could, and built his roadhouse facing the road. The cemetery he left alone, hidden in a grove of trees about 50 yards behind the building. By 1884, Wardlow's had earned a reputation for decent food and fair prices. Margaret Wardlow ran the kitchen with help from 2 local women, cooking the kind of meals travelers expected: ham and greens, cornbread and butter, fried chicken on Sundays, sweet potato pie when the season allowed. The portions were generous, the prices reasonable. 75 cents for dinner, 50 cents for supper. A room upstairs cost another quarter. The roadhouse pulled in steady business. Traveling salesmen stopped there. Families making the trip to Selma or Montgomery. Workers from the iron foundries upriver. Even the local sheriff, a man named Virgil Hayes, ate his Sunday dinner at Wardlow's most weeks. It was a known place, a safe place. The kind of establishment that becomes part of the landscape. Until September of 1884. The first indication that something had changed came from a traveling salesman named Robert Payne. On September 12th, Payne stopped at the roadhouse for his midday meal. He wrote about the experience in a letter to his brother in Mobile, a letter that survived in a family collection and was later donated to the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Arrived at Wardlow's at 11:30, Payne wrote. The dining hall was already set for the noon meal. Mrs. Wardlow greeted me at the door, but something seemed off about her manner. Her eyes looked glazed, unfocused. She showed me to a table without saying a word about the menu or the day's offerings. When I asked what was being served, she simply said, "Everything," and walked back to the kitchen. Payne described the meal that followed. Margaret Wardlow and her kitchen helpers brought out dish after dish: ham, turkey, 3 kinds of greens, cornbread, biscuits, potatoes, beans, squash, pie, more than could fit on the tables. It was enough food for 20 people, Payne wrote. But there were only 4 of us dining that day. When I asked Mrs. Wardlow why so much had been prepared, she looked at me with those strange eyes and said, "They're hungry. They're all so hungry." I paid for my meal and left as quickly as I could. 3 days later, a local farmer named Ezra Collins stopped at the roadhouse with his wife and 2 children. Collins kept a diary, and his entry for September 15th, 1884, recorded what he found. Approached Wardlow's at noon expecting dinner, found the front door standing open, called out but received no answer, entered the dining hall and discovered a table set for at least 15 people. Food covered every surface: ham, turkey, 3 different pies, vegetables I couldn't even name, but no one was there. The food looked fresh, still warm, as if it had just been set out. But the roadhouse was completely empty. Collins and his family didn't stay. They continued on to Selma without eating. But Collins noted something else in his diary that night. As we left, I looked back at the roadhouse. I could swear I saw figures moving past the windows, sitting down at that table, but when I blinked, they were gone. For the next 2 weeks, travelers reported similar experiences. The Roadhouse appeared normal from the outside, but inside, something had fundamentally changed. Tables overflowed with food. Sometimes the dining hall was empty. Sometimes people sat at the tables, eating in complete silence, not looking up when new guests entered. One witness, a woman named Sarah Pritchard, described seeing Margaret Wardlow and her helpers moving mechanically between kitchen and dining hall, bringing out more food even though the tables were already full. "They looked like sleepwalkers," Pritchard wrote in a letter to her sister, "moving through the motions of serving a meal, but their eyes were empty, dead, and the people eating, Lord help me, but I don't think they were breathing." Sheriff Hayes rode out to investigate on September 23rd. He brought his deputy, a man named Frank Morrison. Morrison later gave a sworn statement to the circuit court, a document that remains in the Dallas County Courthouse files. "We arrived at the Roadhouse around 2 in the afternoon," Morrison stated. Sheriff Hayes called out. No response. We entered through the front door and proceeded to the dining hall. What we found there defied explanation. The dining hall table was set for approximately 20 people. Every chair was occupied. Men and women of various ages sat with forks raised to their mouths, plates piled with food in front of them. None of them moved. None of them breathed. They were all dead. Morrison's statement continued. The bodies showed no signs of violence. No wounds, no bruising. But their mouths were open, frozen in the act of chewing. Their eyes were wide, fixed on their plates, and their stomachs. God above, their stomachs. The coroner's report, filed by Dr. William Hutchins of Selma, provided the medical details. Each body showed evidence of catastrophic internal hemorrhage. Their stomachs had ruptured, but not from any external force. The damage came from within, as if something inside them had simply burst. Dr. Hutchins noted something else. Upon examination of the victims' mouths and throats, I found no evidence of recently consumed food. Their digestive systems were empty, completely empty. Yet their faces bore expressions of ravenous hunger, as if they had been starving for days or weeks. Among the dead were Thomas and Margaret Wardlow, their 2 kitchen helpers, and 15 travelers who had apparently stopped for a meal. The food on the table remained untouched, fresh and warm, as if it had just been served. During a thorough search of the property, Sheriff Hayes discovered something in the cemetery behind the Roadhouse. The iron fence had been damaged. Several graves showed signs of disturbance. Fresh earth had been piled near the gate. And carved into the trunk of an oak tree at the cemetery's center were words that Hayes included in his official report.
"Fed the living with the dead. Now the dead feed forever."
The investigation into the Roadhouse deaths expanded to include the property's history. County records showed that the land had belonged to the Ashford family before the war. The Ashfords ran a cotton plantation worked by enslaved people. In the final months of the war, as Union forces advanced through Alabama, the Ashfords burned their cotton stores rather than let them fall into enemy hands. But a local historian named Judith Crane discovered something else while researching old newspaper archives. In March of 1865, just weeks before the war ended, a fire broke out in the Ashford plantation's kitchen. The fire spread to the main house, trapping 19 people inside. Enslaved workers and members of the Ashford family died in the blaze. The Selma Morning Times, in an article from March 28, 1865, reported the deaths but included an unusual detail. The fire occurred during the plantation's weekly Sunday dinner, a large communal meal where the family and houseworkers ate together. The article quoted a survivor as saying, "They were all at table when it started. The doors jammed. They couldn't get out. We could hear them pounding, screaming, and underneath it all, we could hear them still eating, even as the smoke filled the room. 19 people died in that fire. 19 people were found dead at Wardlow's Roadhouse in September 1884. The connection seemed clear, but it raised more questions than it answered. If the deaths were somehow linked to the 1865 fire, what had triggered the events at the Roadhouse 19 years later? Dr. Hutchins attempted to provide a rational explanation in a follow-up report filed in October 1884. It is my professional opinion that the victim suffered from a form of mass hysteria, possibly triggered by contaminated food or water. The psychological effects of such contamination could explain the peculiar behaviors reported by witnesses in the weeks leading up to the deaths. As for the physical condition of the bodies, I believe we are looking at a rare case of spontaneous gastric rupture brought on by extreme anxiety or fear. But Dr. Hutchins' explanation failed to account for several key facts. The food at the Roadhouse tested clean, the water showed no contamination, and witnesses continued to report strange occurrences at the property even after the bodies were removed. A county worker named James Booker was assigned to clear out the Roadhouse in early October. His job was to remove any remaining food and personal belongings before the building was sealed. Booker's report to the county commission described what happened. Entered the Roadhouse at 9 in the morning. The dining hall looked exactly as it had been described. Tables set, food still on the plates. I began clearing the dishes, but every time I turned my back, the plates filled again. Empty one moment, piled high with food the next. I could hear sounds from the kitchen, pots clanging, water running, footsteps. But when I looked, no one was there. Booker left after an hour and refused to return. The county hired 3 more workers to finish the job. None of them lasted more than a day. They all reported the same phenomena: food appearing on plates, sounds of cooking, shadows moving through the rooms, and always the overwhelming smell of a feast being prepared. The Dallas County Commission voted to burn the Roadhouse in November 1884. Sheriff Hayes supervised the operation personally. The building burned for 3 hours, consuming everything from foundation to roof. Nothing remained but scorched earth and the brick chimney from the kitchen. But locals reported that the smell of cooking food lingered for weeks. And on certain nights, travelers passing along the Montgomery Road claimed to see lights where the Roadhouse once stood. Shapes moving behind windows that no longer existed. The sound of dishes clinking. People talking in low, urgent voices. If you take the Montgomery Road south out of Selma today, you can still see the cemetery where the Roadhouse once stood. The iron fence has been repaired. The graves are maintained by a local historical society. There's even a small marker noting the site of Wardlow's Roadhouse and the tragic deaths that occurred there in September 1884. But the marker doesn't mention what happened to Sheriff Hayes. 3 months after the Roadhouse burned, Hayes was found dead in his home. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as acute gastric hemorrhage. Hayes' stomach had ruptured from the inside, and according to his housekeeper, the last thing Hayes said before he died was, "They're still hungry." They're all still hungry. The death certificate noted that Hayes had been fasting for 2 days before he died. His stomach was completely empty, yet he died as if he'd eaten himself to death. Local tradition holds that you should never stop for food along that stretch of the Montgomery Road, especially not at sunset, when the light plays tricks through the oak trees. Because sometimes, people say, you can still smell it. Ham and cornbread, sweet potato pie, the scent of a feast laid out for guests who never stop coming. And if you're driving past at the wrong time, if the light hits just right, you might see them, sitting at tables that aren't there anymore, forks raised to their mouths, plates piled high with food they'll never finish eating. The Dallas County Courthouse maintains a file on the Wardlow Roadhouse incident. It's stored in the basement archives, marked as a historical curiosity. But the file shows signs of recent access. Someone has been looking at it, studying the reports, taking notes. Last month, a developer from Montgomery submitted plans to build a restaurant on the old Roadhouse property. The county commission approved it unanimously. Construction is scheduled to begin in the spring. They're calling it the Wardlow House, a farm-to-table establishment featuring traditional Southern cooking. The developer's preliminary menu includes all the classics: ham, cornbread, greens, sweet potato pie, everything Margaret Wardlow would have served. They've even commissioned a replica of the original dining hall table, built to seat exactly 19 people. The grand opening is set for September 12th. 19 people have already made reservations.